Technique and Constitution. French administration remained until about 1940, as Napoleon had created it in 1800. It had, of course, undergone certain modifications in detail. There had even been certain reversions to pre Napoleonic practices, but no serious changes had taken place, either in orientation or in structure. Constitutional monarchy, constitutional monarchy, monarchy with absolutistic tendencies, bourgeois and socialist republics. The empire, these French regimes all accepted or suffered Napoleon's instrument because it was a good one. There is no doubt that one of the gravest problems of the Third Republic, if one seldom explicitly considered, was that an administration created by and for an authoritarian state should be in the service of a state which wished to be thought liberal. This is the situation of the state today in all areas. Only with difficulty can the technical apparatus be varied. Only with difficulty can it be employed in one way rather than in another. What is he saying here? An administration created by and for an authoritarian state should be in the service of a state which wished to be thought liberal. What does that mean? The authoritarian administration should be in the service of a state which wished to be thought liberal. This is a situation of the state today in all areas. Only. What are you doing, babe? Hi. How's it going? Are you having a good cat day? What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? You smell like cat food. Only with difficulty can the technical apparatus be varied. Only with difficulty can it be employed in one way rather than another. To take a simple example, it matters little in driving an automobile whether the regime be Republican or fascist. Techniques are becoming less and less material, and really important differences from state to state tend to fade progressively away. A given state a given state technique must be exercised on its own terms, though the political opinions of successive ministers differ. This continuity can be expressed in terms of the dictatorship of bureaus. It explains the often noted fact that socialist ministers, once in power, act in all countries very much as did their non socialist predecessors. This is the result of not so called Marxist treachery or of weakness of character, but of the specific weight of techniques. Ardent, in his book on the techniques of the state, emphasizes that there is a technique of state that no regime, whatever its nature, can do without. Every statesman is faced with the dilemma. Either he must apply these techniques on their own invariable terms, or he must renounce them and forego the results they tend to produce. We must not lose sight of the fact that techniques furnish the best possible means, each in its own sphere. A country's economic minister will be forced to plan the economy or abandon it to anarchy. We have already studied the unfeasibility of a half planned economy or of planning which contents itself with making recommendations. Technique will not tolerate half measures. What is true of a political personality, a minister, for example, is in part true of a political regime. It makes little difference whether or not the Constitution provides for a separation of powers, for one or more chamber, or for a democracy on the model of East or of West. From the technical point of view, the results will be very nearly the same. Any type of administration other than that which is technically the most efficient is impossible. A different financial regime is also an impossibility. In the case of taxes, for example, it is said that a rightist regime will favor indirect taxes that bear hardest on the general population because this population represents the masses, but that a socializing regime will favor direct taxes that bear hardest on the great fortunes. This only shows that a scientific tax technique is not being applied. It seems incontestable that such a rigorous technique, in view of the yields it can produce, will in the end carry the day. There is an optimum tax structure which can be completely determined. It gives the best yield to the state, and at the same time equalizes the fortunes of the citizens and saves the fiscal substance. There is no valid reason for not implementing it. This optimal system is making headway in all states and is gradually overcoming the associated and adventitious ideological motives. In the same way, planning imposes itself little by little on every regime. It is ideologically puerile to profess to see differences between Soviet and Nazi planning. It is ideological puerile to profess to see differences between Soviet and Nazi planning. Planning is not reserved to authoritarian states. Democratic states which tend towards socialism, such as France or Britain after 1945, or non-socializing democratic states such as Denmark, today employ the system of planning. Even states which are completely liberal, such as South Africa, are engaged in planning. This does not mean that the whole economy is necessarily planned. It means that the technique of planning is making headway even in political systems unfavorable to it. Whether it is a question of an immigration plan, an export plan, a transport plan, or a city planning operation, the same technique is involved. Why is it like lagging? Is it just too hot? I have to like put it in the freezer. What the heck? No, it's not lagging. I don't know why it does that. I forgot where it was. Oh, here we go. Planning is being extended to all domains of political life, as well as to all state regimes. In 1951, Chancellor Adenauer declared that German youth had not responded to the efforts of the regime, that the youth were anarchic and disorganized, that it was impossible to have any hopes for them, and that planning represented the sole means of reintegrating this wayward youth into the German community. He announced that a German youth plan was being elaborated to cope with the necessity of bringing youth into rigid organizations. Giving youth an ideal and a collective soul discipline, and a fixed way of life. Ardenur went to say that all this had to be planned. In a way, he was suggesting a return to totalitarian methods. France in 1952 took steps to provide planning for scholarship and tourism. In 1956, it planned youth organizations, and in 1960, sports. It is to be noted that planning is becoming more and more widespread in the United States, where there is a tendency to apply if not only to economic problems, but also to social, for example, city planning, and political questions. Indeed, American planning is becoming a basic element. It is so it is no longer an accidental fact or a mere adjunct. In the United States, there are nearly 2,000 planning organisms in the service of the various states, not to mention national organisms, some of which are public, the Council of Economic Advisors, and some private, the National Planning Association. Uh, we must not lose. Here, drink of water. What's up with the baby? Hi. How did you get so beautiful? Hi. Good boy. Good boy. Hi. What are you doing? What's up, viewer? Oh shit. Why is my... I don't get why it lags like this. Is it getting too hot? I don't know how I could cool it off. Should I like put it in my... I have to like put this thing in my freezer or something to stream. We must not lose sight of the fact that nations are more and more closely connected. Moreover, when one nation engages in planning, there is an inevitable repercussion on the others. They are more or less obliged to engage in planning too, and the planning of one element implies first the understanding, then the mastery of many others, and little by little the planning of these others. It is not possible to establish a plan for a small corner of the economy and permit all the rest of the economy to remain free. Gaston Bardet has shown that good city planning requires the mobilization of the entire economy. Then, it will be said, the best thing is not to do any city planning at all. But planning cannot possibly be avoided. The explosive increase in the population means that no one will have any living space unless the area at our disposal is organized rationally. Moreover, what are you doing? What are you doing? And the lagging again. I don't know why it's doing this. Maybe I should open up the door so it gets a little cold in here. Crazy ass cat. Moreover, certain inconveniences of urban life are daily becoming more serious. For example, traffic density, air pollution, and excessive noise. None of these problems can be effectively resolved except by means of a truly regulative plan. In the last few years, numerous medical and administrative congresses have, of necessity, been concerned with this cluster of problems. Similar problems are raised by immigration. No country is today in a position to allow free movement in or out. Free movement would result in excessive population displacement in the direction of countries with high wages or political stability. Conversely, countries with dictatorial regimes would see their populations dwindle, a state of affairs they would not welcome since it means diminution of power. Democratic countries would see an exaggerated rise in their populations, which they certainly do not desire because of the danger to their economic equilibrium and the risk of a fifth column. What is to be done? Put a complete stop to population displacement? Such a solution is neither possible nor desirable for reasons of manpower and colonialization. But this presupposes a plan for immigration, subject moreover to international agreement. Immigration planning will be identical whether we have to do with a dictatorship or a democracy. It will require identical police, economic, and administrative mechanisms. Present-day democracies cannot escape these technical necessities. These examples help us grasp the fact that the structures of the modern state and its organs of government are subordinate to the technique dependent on the state. If we were to consider in turn each of the indispensable services of the modern state, we would find that they are becoming more and more alike, regardless of the theories of government under which they operate. We must insist on the more and more. The final identity has not yet been achieved. There is no greater similarity among the techniques of the state than among mechanical techniques. They are backward countries with respect to both. But the direction of the evolution is plain, and there is, practically speaking, no way of arresting it. We shall see why. The supremacy of technical instruments is a result of their exact correspondence to social necessities. When society did not have constantly to appeal to the state, when problems of all kinds were not as numerous or acute as they are today, the state was relatively free with respect to its instruments. In spite of all the worthy persons who reassure themselves by saying that all historical epochs are alike, that the crises of the 4th century resembled those of the 9th, and so on, the fact is that no one ever before saw world economies, world wars, or world and national populations which, on the average, double every 45 years. The state is no longer in a position to reject the most efficient means possible. Its problems are more difficult and complicated than ever encountered before. If the state desires to have any effect on society, and it has no alternative, there is only one way to have this effect. Parliamentary discussions, the hesitance of theocraticians, the protestations of humanists, democratic elections, all of these signify very little. The state has no more real choice than the worker on the assembly line. It is led to the technical society by the very terms of the problem. Let us consider two examples. The concentration camp is generally taken as a characteristic of dictatorial and fascistic regimes. Such institutions undeniably exist in the Soviet Union, Poland, and Bulgaria. But they existed in France under the Third Republic and in England during the Boer War. We must not be misled by differences in name. Work camps, re education camps, refugee camps all represent the same fact, and we are only too aware of how important the use of concentration camps was in Algeria. We are speaking here of the concentration camp in its pure form, which has nothing to do with crematoria or hanging up the inmates by their thumbs. Such tortures are imputable to men, not to technique. The camp as an institution is making its appearance everywhere, under the most varied political regimes, as a result of the conjunction of social problems and police technique. The term of the problem can be enumerated in this way. Given the nationalistic organization and conversely the existence of fifth columns, given population expansion, it is absolutely necessary to establish a police power based not on individuals but on categories of individual. There is no way of escaping establishment of police power by categories, which implies, for example, preventative arrests, concentration of masses of innocent persons, not for judging but for sorting, and so forth. To effect sorting and checking operations, highly perfected systems have been developed, as for example, the MVD in the Soviet Union, the FBI in the United States, and the CIC in occupied Germany. Such systems obviously often require a considerable length of time for their operations. Suspects may be detained for years before the system finishes its investigations. Its precision and rigor causes it to move slowly. The technical system of concentration camps has proved so efficient and satisfactory to the state that it is increasingly being incorporated into our society. It no longer represents the activity of aberrant dictators, but rather the activity of every good administrator. The concentration camp system of today is closely linked to the nationalistic state, but it fits so well into administrative systems in general that there is no chance of its disappearing, even if the nationalistic structure of the modern world were to change. Certain categories of undesirables would remain, social misfits for whom the camp is the ideal solution, at least until a more efficient technique allows the resolution of the problem at even less expense. But it is highly improbable that this will happen in the near future. The second example is the system of sales engineering, originally conceived in the United States to facilitate private commerce within the country. Now the system exists on the level of international commerce under state direction. There are firms which specialize in psychological and sociological prospecting of markets. The products of one nation cannot be sold on the markets of others unless they meet certain conditions, not only of manufacture, but of design and usefulness. It would be clearly inefficient to ship products abroad which one knew in advance would not sell. It is said that there is no single or not a single American firm which would dare launch a new product, even a hairpin, and itself assume responsibility for design, color, etc. The firm takes its problem to one of the 3 or 4 large industrial design consultants whose job it is to give to the object in question its optimum external appearance, that is, the appearance which best suits the public taste. This approach to consumer research is recognized by American producers as the only correct one. It is nevertheless freely chosen. As soon as commerce becomes international, however, it enters more or less into the province of the state. The problem might then be how a nation with a foreign trade deficit could wipe it out. To accomplish this, it must comply with the law of the creditor's market. One of the organizations described would have to be consulted, and what was hitherto choice based on interest then becomes obligatory. Once more, we see that a technically backward nation is forced to model itself after the most advanced nation as soon as organic relations are established between the two. The situation is not due to American desire to dominate or to American pride. It is a technical situation. There is one and only one efficient method for establishing a system of international commerce, and it is necessary to comply with this method, no matter what the view of the state. Of course, the state could conceivably choose to go bankrupt. I have taken 2 examples, as different as possible, in order to emphasize the degree to which technical facts act upon the state in all areas. But the facts lead us further. State constitutions do not alter the use of techniques, but techniques do act rather rapidly on state structures. They subvert democracy and tend to create a new aristocracy. Almost all sociologists are in agreement here. It is sufficient to refer to the writings of Georges Friedman to be convinced of the unanimity which exists on this point, even among sociologists with the most pronouncedly democratic and socialist leanings. Political equality becomes a myth, unattainable through the agency of technique. On the contrary, technique, to an ever greater degree, produces on the technical level a majority of servants and a minority of governors. Friedman has studied the matter scientifically and has shown in a completely nonpartisan way that the worker slaves are reduced to the lowest possible human value when their functions are specialized to completely particular tasks. I'm reading The Technological Society. This is a chapter talking about the impact of technique on the state, like politics and government. And technique is the totality of methods rationally arrived at to have absolute efficiency. So it's like technique is it's like kind of applying the scientific method to any subject, and you try and find like what's the most efficient method to do something. And everything like in our society, like including the state, is geared towards this criteria of efficiency. Whatever is most efficient is better. And so in a way we become slaves to technique, because like if the technician comes up with the most rational method to do something, Like, you have to do it, or else you're not being rational. You're like, I don't know. It's pretty interesting. So, like, we originally created techniques to improve our lives, and then the technique takes on a life of its own and becomes like we become what was originally intended to be a tool to help mankind have better life becomes like our master, and now we are enslaved by technique, and like we need technique, and it's not good because it reduces everything to like a numerical value. So instead of human life being sacred, it's just like you're just like a number or something. I wonder if I can press a button to see the chat. Oh, here we go. Live chat. Oh, okay, cool. I've never streamed on my phone before, so I'm like new to this. Okay. We see this phenomenon of specialization, what technique makes of a man in the aggregate. For example, the precision of police mechanisms make it possible to train a good policeman in a few weeks. But the man so trained has no knowledge at all of the techniques within which he works. Men are shifted unceasingly from job to job, never attaining a true calling. They are vocationally downgraded by technique. Oh, because of technique, you can train someone to do something quickly. And like in the past, it would take years of like hard work to acquire these skills. And because of that, your skills would retain a certain value. Well, now, because of technique, we can train people quickly, and now your skills have no value because I can just get rid of you, train someone new quickly, and you're replaceable, where before you weren't. But a vocation is a major part of life and culture. Under these circumstances, even a pervasive culture rapidly disappears. Oh yeah, I got this idea to read this book from like a conspiracy channel, basically. It's the book. Yeah, the book's The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul. He also wrote a book called Propaganda: The Formation of Men's Attitudes, which I read. It was pretty interesting. He's like really fucking smart though. Like this shit, I'm probably gonna have to read multiple times to like really like. A lot of this is going over my head. This is like heavy reading. But it's fun because it gets you like thinking and stuff, right? I like in the movie Good Will Hunting. Robin Williams asked Matt Damon character like what type of books he should read. And he said like the kind that blows your hair back or something like that. Well, I don't have any hair, but if I did. Okay, we must also consider the influence of agricultural techniques, which result in the exhaustion of certain types of soils, while medical techniques lead to overpopulation. The interaction of these two factors bring about or the interactions of these two factors bring about the creation of masses of underdeveloped beings who are considered by some as unfit for democracy because they are incapable of reacting with necessary speed to the problems of life. Hmm. In contrast to this mob, there is a limited elite that understands the secrets of their own techniques, but not necessarily of all techniques. These men are close to the seat of modern governmental power. The state is no longer founded on the average citizen, but on the ability and knowledge of this elite. The average man is altogether unable to penetrate technical secrets or governmental organization, and consequently can exert no influence at all on the state. Damn. I'm powerless. I watched a video that said due to the massification of society, people feel like they have no power. And because people feel like they have no power, they develop an unhealthy, toxic obsession with power. And even, that's why, like, just even like a little moderator power, it's like a big deal to people to be able to mute you on the internet, right? And like, because it makes them, makes them feel alive, probably. And that's why you get all these like abusive mods, because they're like chasing that fix. Friedman, in order to do something constructive about this downgraded and over-specialized manpower, has put his hopes in the evolution of socialism, which, by giving man the feeling of socialist brotherhood and the consciousness of working for the common good, would give him pleasure in his work. But this psychological remedy, whose value I am not trying to deny, could do nothing at all to bridge the gap between the intellectual incapacity of the mob of specialized workers on the one hand and the monopoly of technical means by a technical elite on the other. The new elite is an elite even when it is popular with the people. This split is obvious in all domains. For example, in the administrative domain, the intervention of a technique of organization and mechanization results in the creation, as Mass puts it, of two classes very far removed from one another. The first, numerically small, understands the means to conceive, organize, direct, and control. The second, infinitely more numerous, is composed of mere executants. The latter are hacks who understand nothing of the complicated techniques they are carrying out. It is not conceivable that the normal operation of democracy would be acceptable to those who exercise this technical monopoly, which, moreover, is a hidden monopoly in the sense that its practitioners are unknown to the masses. Technique shapes an aristocratic society, which in turn implies aristocratic government. Democracy in such a society can only be a mere appearance. Even now, we see in propaganda the premises of such a state of affairs. When it comes to state propaganda, there is no longer any question of democracy. Let us consider ordinary propaganda as it occurs in Republican countries. It is innocently said that since there is a plurality of parties and propaganda machine, they counterbalance one another. Oh, because there's a left and a right, they counterbalance each other. The elector is therefore free to make a real choice between rival candidates. However, certain persons, perhaps no less innocently, claim to be able to mathematize everything. Specifically, the propaganda which is most technical, the most skillful and urgent, gets the greatest number of votes. As far as I am concerned, neither of these positions in itself perverts democracy. What does is the very accumulation of propaganda techniques, the very development of technical means for exerting pressure. It is not true that two opposed propaganda apparatuses cancel each other out, or rather, it may be true politically, but it is false psychologically. The real problem lies in the psychological situation of the individual assailed by a number of equally skilled propaganda acting upon his nervous system. And now, with the discovery of new methods, probing and disturbing his unconscious, working over his intelligence, and exasperating his reactions, the individual can no longer live except in a climate of tension and overexcitement. He can no longer be smiling and skeptical spectator. Be a smiling and skeptical spectator. He is indeed engaged, but involuntarily so, since he has ceased to dominate his own thoughts and actions. Techniques have taught the organizers how to force him into the game. He has been stripped of his power of judgment. If he has not been fixed in advance, he oscillates at random, in obedience not to his own power of judgment, but to the law of large numbers. The intensive use of propaganda destroys the citizen's faculty of discernment. In a truly democratic regime, everything rests on judicious choice and free will. But it is precisely in democracies that propaganda machines proliferate. Where only a single propaganda machine exists, that of the state, it conditions individuals directly and could not be really intensive since there is no competition. In the so called democracies, propaganda must become more and more intense in order to dominate its rivals. It becomes thereby more and more insidious. That's a pretty good point. Never thought about that. That blew my hair back. Thus, technique disturbs immediately the operation of a democracy. It leads public opinion in one direction only, because the means at the disposal of a state directed by a technical aristocracy are generally more powerful than those at the disposal of parties. The very presence of technique, therefore, poses a grave problem. But for every political system, a further problem arises: the changing variety of available machines, which entails the disordering of traditional strategic and tactical military conceptions. It is of course possible to concoct grand theories on the art of war and strategic doctrines, to organize armies in accordance with philosophic principles, and so on. But one factor always upsets everything: the machine. The machine has in fact conditioned modern strategy. Hitler, because he understood this, achieved certain successes. The technical problem can be simply stated: given a certain machine, how can it be used most efficiently? What actions concerning logistics, liaison, and coordination of weapons must be taken? What plan must be created to make optimal use of the machine? And so on. For example, the tank conditioned combat between 1939 and 1943. Today, aircraft, guided missiles, and intercontinental rockets are of major importance. But beyond the effect of technique on strategy, the changing machinery of war forces political choice. The United States, in a congressional report in 1949, recognized that because of the rapid advance of technique, it was no longer in a position to pay for complete armament for a land army with an unlimited number of vehicles of every type, plus a navy and an air force. The military aircraft of 1946 were already out of date by 1949. It seemed impossible to continue the construction of machines by the thousands, which would never see service and would soon be outmoded. A political choice had to be made. Similarly, Britain abandoned most of its prototypes in order to devote itself to constructing a unique kind of army judged to be decisive. The fact of forced political choice was confirmed by the distribution of military tasks among continental Europe and the United States and Great Britain. As a consequence of the Atlantic Pact, with further developments, it became necessary to seek new modes of financing to support the burden of military technique distributed as described. This reminds us of the interdependence of techniques in general, and in particular of the influence of technique on military concepts and through this on political choice. In this connection, recall Bevan's biting remark in one of his last lectures: the technique of modern war have destroyed democracy. This is precisely our point. Let us reason by analogy. In the same way that military machines condition strategy, organization, and other techniques condition the structures of the modern state. Wiener was not speaking idly when he said that the different systems of broadcasting and air transport networks make a world state inevitable. Technique puts the question not whether a given state form is more just, but whether it permits more efficient utilization of techniques. The state is no longer caught between political reality and moral theories and imperatives. It is caught between political reality and technical means. The problem is to find the state form most adequate to the application of techniques the state has as at its disposal. Doubtless, it is free to prefer a certain doctrine and to look with disfavor on a given technique. It is free to dream of the realization of a certain kind of justice rather than to make use of technical means. But then it must expect almost inevitable retribution, such as the French army suffered in 1940. Our generals had their doctrine and their military conceptions, but they neglected the influence of the machine. A heroic example. It was said of getting yourself killed at the outposts of progress. Face to face with technical efficiency, the state owes it to itself to give this efficiency free rein. Arden has written, "Good methods bring about good structures." How much more of this chapter is? Okay, it's almost done. Fuck. What's up, little baby? Okay. These factors doom paramilitary government, which is burdened with considerable excess baggage which hinders technical progress. The numerous persons involved in decision making, the ponderousness and slowness of democratic mechanisms, the complete inability of a representative assembly to apply political technique, the frequent turnover in paramilitary personnel in contrast to the stability of the technicians in the service of the administration, etc. As a result of these factors, technical advance gradually invades the state, which in turn is compelled to assume forms and adopt institutions favorable to this advance. The importance of commissions in French paramilitary life is already recognized, and it might be added that these commissions have clearly got out of hand. In the United States, the system of lobbyists, a group of individuals who hang about the corridors of Congress, assures liaison between the legislative organ and the technical organ. All the great American corporations and technical groups have representatives accredited to Washington who are charged with looking after the interests, not necessarily in the capitalist sense, of the groups they represent in the legislative branch. The system is perfectly legal in the United States and allows the retention of some connection between politicians, who are more and more detached from reality and the technical conditions of life. Such institutions represent very weak modes of adaptation. It is certain that the modern state will eventually be compelled to total adaptation. Total adaptation may come about through a revolution such as the one which created the Hitler state. It may be, however, that the Constitution will not undergo even the slightest of alterations, and that the whole problem will be reduced to the elimination of political powers, which will become purely formal, a mere matter of show. The conclusion seems unavoidable that this is the road upon which our democracies have already entered. But if the state adapts itself completely to technical necessities and becomes nothing but a huge machine, will it still be recognizably a state? Let us first all remark that the question in no sense presupposes a theory of a technological state. Things happen today in the political sphere without the benefit of the minutest theory. There is no longer any question of the state in the classic sense. To think otherwise is a laughable error on the part of the majority of those who talk about the state, be they philosophers, theologians, publicists, politicians, or professors of constitutional law. They are all speaking of the state in terms and forms appropriate to the state of the 19th century or to that of Napoleon. The situation today is radically different. The political power is no longer precisely a classical state, and it will be less and less so. It is an amalgama of organizations with a greatly reduced organism for making decisions, reduced because, in the interplay of techniques, decision making has less and less place. The situation is comparable to the elimination by an automatic machine of the individual, who retains no function except that of inspecting the machine and seeing that it remains working in order. The political power is like any well-adjusted organization which functions with minimum of decision making. Such an organization is not too rigid and knows itself how to adapt to current problems, which are admittedly not yet in this situation. But we are rapidly approaching it. This is the state form which Lenin forecast for the socialist world. The state, he said, will be reduced to census taking and statistics. Lenin, of necessity, described the future role of the state in a very summary fashion. The techniques of organization were not yet developed in 1920, but what he discerned is exactly what we observed and outlined today behind the old-fashioned Republican mask. It is not necessary that such a society be socialist. What seems to be important is that the state Lenin foresaw and the purely technological state which modern organization imply are in fact identical. The state such that such a state is socialist is debatable. That it is technical, a statement not intended as a theory, is not debatable. At this very moment, technical synthesis could bring about the total elimination of the state in the traditional sense. The framework in which society exists could get along well enough without the traditional state, and perhaps even do better without it. The technological state corresponds directly to modern society itself, since if it's technically constructed and exists in the very soul of men who worship efficiency, order, and speed. The classical state corresponds to vanished forces of an entirely different nature. Okay, I'm going to take a break because I just read for an hour. So yeah.
Peace out.